This is Jesse Hensley.
And this is Josh Turner.
Welcome to Turn Down for What? Thank you for coming in. This is Turn Down for What? There for Josh, where we talk about EV and other EV adventures throughout the developments over the last few months. Last week we talked about the charging units, the different standards the government will be using, and there has been some changes on that. So today we're going to be going over some of the changes on that, including some of the new regulations that Texas has decided to put out into the grants that they'll be providing for charging networks. We'll also be talking about the Rivian. So the Rivian has a new vehicle coming out, 2025, I believe, isn't it, Josh?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that vehicle will be called the R2. So we'll be waiting for D2 to come out later on that year. So that way we can have a full, completed vehicle.
Beep, boop, beep, boop,
beep, boop. And we also have a guest today. We have a Rivian driver. What does he own?
He has an R1T.
R1T. So he'll be giving us some details on what it's like to have an RT1.
R1T.
Or whatever that is, because I have an F-150 and I have a charging unit that does not want to charge at my house right now. So I have also been using Rivian to charge my truck. We have a park here that Rivian has a level 2 charger at, and I decided to test that out, and it actually worked really well for us. So at least I can drive my truck here.
And this is at one of the state parks?
That is at a state park. So
and it's a level 2?
I believe it's a level 2. Yeah, it was 10.
I think under 10. 20 is considered level 2.
Yeah, we found that out during our trip yesterday.
Yeah.
Are we going to go into details about that this afternoon? I think we can.
We can.
So
let's start with the topics of the day.
Yes. So
news article 1, we were discussing the updates from the conversation last week with CCS and is CCS dead? And we had some important news updates come out this week. In regards to the release of the NACS, the adaptation to NACS, Rivian came out and announced that they are going to be
NACS one more time.
NACS.
Okay, just making sure.
They are coming out with the adaptation, similar to Ford and GM, where they will be allowing the NACS models. But then there was a quote from the White House that was basically saying that in order to receive the federal funding, you have to basically have the CCS, but they will also allow the NACS in addition to that, which is kind of an interesting pivot when it comes to that transition, because it's one of those things that, it shows that there is movement on a national level and eyes on this on a national level. The direct quote from the White House spokesperson was, "Earlier this year, we developed minimum standards to ensure publicly funded EV charging is accessible, reliable, and affordable for all drivers, and we required interoperability to promote competition. Those standards give flexibility for adding both CCS and NACS as long as drivers can count on a minimum of CCS."
So far, now what we're talking about here is the CCS is the standard charger that you see on most vehicles. The NACS was created by, I believe, Tesla created that, and it's the North American Charging Standard, I think is the abbreviation. I could be wrong on that one, but it is basically what the Tesla system uses. And ironically, Texas will require that the NACS is part of that system. And even more ironic than that, I don't believe you can even sell Teslas in Texas still, do they? Because of the dealership. We'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
So here they are trying to make sure that you use just that system, or you can use that system, and yet you still can't buy a car and have it directly shipped to you there for their...
Yeah, the news article to come out yesterday was basically that Texas will require NACS compatibility to get public funding for chargers. So the upcoming round of funding through their Texas Department of Transportation, it will require an additional compatibility with NACS to new charging infrastructures if they desire to get the federal funding. So, I mean, that's directly tied to some of the upcoming funding that's coming around. But that could be an interesting thing, when it comes to all of the funding around all the states. We could see more states come out with that requirement within the next couple of weeks as those, because the funding hasn't really dropped yet for the main chunk of those funds that are coming out. So that might be something that we're seeing, the station requirements for NACS and CCS at all of these stations.
Now, the other thing about this too is when you look at the change of the market, first Ford announced that they were moving over to the, or will also use the NACS. Then you had General Motors move over to the NACS. And then just a few days ago, you had Rivian also come out. And that's another news topic from where Rivian will also now be using the NACS. So you're having the majority of the major EV companies move over to that standard versus the CCS standard. And, you know, that's, again, I think that that's another directional shift to where the CCS probably will not be used in the cars later on in the year. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, pivoting to
Pivot.
the main conversation of today, we were going to discuss the announcement also this week that came out of Rivian for their new R2. It's a compact SUV. They're targeting a launch in 2026. I think orders will open in 2025. It is going to be very similar to their R1S, but it's going to be a more compact size. The R1S, I've seen a couple in person. They're very similar to a smaller scale full-size SUV. But this, I think this model will probably be a lot similar if we're relating it directly to Ford. I think the R1S is going to be similar to a larger version, but pretty similar to an actual Explorer.
Well, and you also have the Escape in there as well. So,
But that's what I'm saying. I think you saw the Explorer being kind of the size of the R1S, but this R2 will kind of be more similar to the
yeah, your
Escape.
subcompact.
Yeah, it's a
SUV.
smaller version. I always thought that the R1S would be more of a full-size SUV, and it is, but it doesn't. It's more of a three-row like an Explorer compared to.
Still smaller than a lot of vehicles that you would think out there. But again, it's kind of unique when we park beside of a Rivian. You know, with our truck, the scale is definitely there.
It's a size difference for
yeah,
sure.
it's a very big size difference. To me, it looks more like the size of a Ranger.
Yeah.
The newer Ranger, the larger Ranger. But again, it's something that the size, if they can keep the cost down, I think this is going to be a big success for them. The market is definitely trying to shift that way, but I believe the biggest cost is these batteries. So if you have a smaller, lighter weight vehicle and you can go with a smaller pack than 100 kWh packs, then you're able to have something that price-wise would compete in the market in that $40,000 to $50,000 range. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot for these companies. I know that the Tesla mentioned that they were trying to build a much cheaper car, and I think originally it was $30,000. I doubt that that's the number now.
And a lot of their prices have come down recently.
Yeah, they have been moving their prices down. I think as these battery factories, the gigafactories are coming online, you're starting to see these batteries go into more into the market, and obviously supply and demand in a situation like that. So again, it's another direction of another car company moving into more EVs, and just have to wait and see how that works out.
What I would really like to see, which I think Cadillac, hopefully with their Escalade IQ, will be the first one, but there is trucks, full-size trucks like the F-150. You have the Hummer, which is about the closest thing that you're going to get to the full-size SUV. But up until date, there's only smaller vehicles in the EV space when it comes to SUVs. And Rivian R1S, I thought was going to be the solution to that. And they've announced the R2, which is the smaller version. But I think there's going to be a push, especially amongst the demographic of people looking to purchase EVs. I think that there is going to be a push to see a full-size SUV because it would be practical for a family car. Whereas, me with 3 kids, can we make an R1S work? Absolutely. But would a full-size SUV that's an EV be a lot more attractive? Absolutely. And I mean, they could utilize the Expedition is built on the F-150 chassis. I mean, they could utilize that setup and, have basically the F-150 Lightning expanded and have an Expedition-sized EV. But there is no car dealership or car manufacturer that I've seen, other than Cadillac announcing their IQ, which I'm hoping is going to be the first full-size SUV outside of the Hummer
I
EV, which
think
is
Ford did make an announcement that they are working on that with the Expedition,
mm,
because obviously it's the same system as the F-150 Lightning when it comes to the base floor plan, everything from the firewall forward. In this case, you could use everything except just to drop that body on the back. So I think we'll see something from Ford fairly soon. And you got to remember the plant that they're working at right now with the F-150, as they shift that plant, what are they going to do with the tooling and everything? Whereas you can do the F-150 Lightning, or whatever the new Lightning would be in Tennessee, and that plant that currently makes the F-150 Lightning could be retooled and then just drop a SUV body on it. So that might be the opportunity for them just to switch over. So they did
and
make an announcement on that.
yeah, and you can study all of the various vehicles that have been announced, and most of them are smaller vehicles, smaller range. But I think that there's going to be a larger push for larger vehicles, larger range, like we discussed last week. And I mean, like the Dodge truck, like you're seeing these vehicles coming out with longer range, larger vehicles. I think that people having the full spectrum of opportunities to select from. Obviously, those vehicles are going to be slightly more expensive, but the larger SUV market is slightly more expensive. The R2 that is coming out will have a range of starting at 40,000, compared to most EVs currently on the market. That's
cheap.
that's pretty darn
That's cheap.
affordable. So that's going to be a huge plus. I mean, obviously that's that's a really good starting point, and with tax credits and things like that, obviously there's
You're
there's
taking
going to
another
be a good opportunity
$7,500 off
to
of
get
that
into an
price.
EV with a Rivian. I mean, Rivian having a lot of bells and whistles, that's a really good opportunity for EV drivers.
And I definitely see that, because that car is going to fall under the tax credits. So say you are looking for a vehicle like this and you get it as soon as they offer it. Most of the time, and I believe Rivian did this, they honored the price, even though the price went up during manufacturing, of whoever got that price. So say you bought this for $40,000, you have that $7,500 tax credit, and it might come out in a year, year and a half. You're going to have a car now that is $3,250. That's cheap. And then when you look at the amount of cost that we'll have for the fueling, and the fact that at the time it comes out, you're going to have a much more robust charging system and a charging network. That's really going to make a good opportunity for that lower tiered price point to be met.
Because there's very few vehicles that meet that criteria. I mean, most of the vehicles that we're seeing in the EV space really start at 50. I mean, Tesla has a couple of their models that are lower, and then you have things like the Nissan Leaf and some of the real small vehicles that offer that. But a lot of the newer EVs coming to the market are a lot higher, and so I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense to provide an affordable vehicle
Yep.
to drivers. So
All right. So one thing we did have happen this week, we did tour the factory for Tritium, which is a EV charging maker. They make all the components for the charging apparatuses, your cabinets, everything that goes into it. We also spoke with one of our solar providers, and he did mention that when he was charging up his vehicle this week, he was charging next to a Chevrolet Silverado. Now, it had no badging, is what he said. We didn't have a picture of it,
it's a
unfortunately.
prototype, yeah.
Yes, it was a prototype, but he did have that truck out in the wild. He was very complimentary on how it looked too. So it was, and on the other side was a Lucid Air. So very
It's a
good
good
company
combo.
to be
Yeah.
around. But at least you will see the fact that General Motors has that truck out doing its rounds, making sure everything works well, doing the testing. It looks like that's probably going to meet the time frame that they were looking at, which is fourth quarter of this year.
Yeah.
So that's good news to have another one of those trucks. I know a lot of people that have those ordered in Kingsport and other regions of Tennessee. So we're hopefully going to be able to have that truck coming into the market when it's supposed to, and that's going to give us more opportunity for EVs.
And going back to the point that you were just discussing, Tritium,
Yes, beautiful place.
incredibly impressive facility. Having the ability to tour inside was an honor. Seeing the pride and the level of quality that they take, I think what the current charging infrastructure improvement is needed is answered, and there's a solution provided by Tritium with some of their solutions. Just all of the bits and pieces, you could tell there's extreme pride in it. You could tell that they do the highest quality of work.
Well, and it's very technical too. When you start looking at one of these cabinets, this is what you would find in a high-end data center. This is what you would find that would control your apps and your phones, but yet they've been able to use it in a way to where it can charge your vehicle. So it's that speed, it's the connectivity, it's the ability to transfer that power. It seems easy just to do it. Plug it in, just like an outlet. Hey, it's simple. No, it's very difficult to get that power that quick to a vehicle. And then when you start considering that that plant wasn't around until about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and
So
it's
they
in
signed the
Tennessee.
lease in February.
Yeah,
They started work in May.
yeah.
And they started producing their first units in August.
And it was a very, very nice factory. So it's something that Tennessee should be very proud of. They are sourcing over 90% of their products are American made or Tennessee made for the NEVI compliance systems. And while we were talking with them, there is even discussion to get us more of those items offshore into Tennessee or into America to do the work here. So
Yeah, but I mean,
creating jobs
I had the
is-
opportunity to charge, my truck while we were there at a tritium station, and it was quick, reliable.
Yep.
It promised a certain level of delivered kilowatts. I got that number.
Yep.
So you could tell that it was quick, easy access, good software. It worked very well. And I'm excited to see how those units play a factor in the upcoming rollout.
Yeah, especially when you start looking at how many stations will be coming out under the NEVI and for Tennessee, the TIVI. I'm sure every state's going to have their acronym that uses the Department of Transportation with their state. But all of the requirements, you only have about 2 companies that qualify. And the fact that one of those companies are in Tennessee, doing their manufacturing in Tennessee. And this isn't, getting something in, boxing it together. This is all the major components. This is very nice assembly lines. This was put together in a way that for such an early company to develop that system that fast is just beyond impressive.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in a lot of high-end executives from different car
Yep.
manufacturers. And I mean, they've been a really established, reputable business out of Australia. But their presence in the United States for manufacturing started last year.
Yeah.
And now already the Tennessee factory is out producing them
Everybody
globally.
else,
And they're the second largest, hardware provider globally now, which is a huge statement towards where they are and where they're going.
And it looks like from their projections, they'll definitely be number one within the next.
Very little bit,
Yeah, very little
especially
time,
once
6 months or
the
so.
NEVI releases. But they're on overdrive trying to get all
Yeah,
the
they can't even
units.
catch up with what they
Yeah,
have now.
they're trying to catch up
sending
with what they
units
have now.
everywhere.
But once the NEVI orders come in, I'm sure that they're going to be.
That's going to keep it busy.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. We were able to see that factory, and again, we were in Nashville doing some work on behalf of our projects, and it's just glad to see those companies being able to prosper in Tennessee. So now we're going to take a quick break, and next we're going to be talking with a Rivian owner and get his thoughts on the good and the bad of having a Rivian.
All right, we're back. We have Eric Novotny on the phone. He's from the South DC area, and he is a current owner for a R1T Rivian. Eric, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me on, Josh. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So just a few questions that we had. I mean, obviously, you've owned a Rivian. When did you get that?
So I've had it now for about, I want to say about 4 months. Yeah. So a while, 4 months, not that long, but obviously I had a deposit back on when they kind of first released the press release. So that was like February, I want to say like February of 19 is when I put a deposit on it.
Wow. I mean, it was multiple
yeah.
years for that one to come through.
Correct. Yeah. Obviously, I think the combination of obviously a new car manufacturer, not having a lot of the built-in capacity, part pipeline, just the general kind of efficiency of scale that clearly your established auto manufacturers have, but where they can bring something to market a little bit faster. I think that hurt, and then obviously COVID, definitely, put the brakes on a lot of stuff. So
hurt a lot of businesses, but yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
What drew you to Rivian in the first place?
Biggest thing that drew me to it, honestly, was at the time was, to quote Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last type thing. So, I mean, at the time, obviously, from an electric truck standpoint, Rivian was the first one to really bring a tangible, prototype to market and looked like they were going to roll it out. And obviously, the deposit was refundable. So they were really just first. And subsequently, I put deposits down on some cyber trucks. I tried to get in on the deposit. To be perfectly frank, as we discussed, I tried to get in on the deposit on the Lightning, but just kind of wasn't paying attention to it and kind of missed that. So it was really about being first. And I know there's a couple of other smaller EV truck potential manufacturers, like Atlas maybe is one that was kind of had a conceptualized idea and had a working model, but they clearly were not as far along at the time as Rivian was in terms of back in business and, having a prototype out that was going to be a final rendering of what was going to be done. So it was really just purely about timing at that point.
Yeah. And, I mean, what specifically drew you to the EV space? Was it just strictly just wanting to be on the front of that market, or was there something specific that drew you to the EV space in general?
Yeah, I mean, not anything about rushing to the front. I mean, at that point, I'd driven some EVs. Obviously, the driving experience is nice. It's different, clearly, as you well know, coming from a ICE-based truck, vehicle into the EV space. It's different, but I'd driven a few. And then I was also looking at it in large part from my standpoint as far as cost of ownership. The truck I came out of was a GMC Sierra 2500 Denali Duramax diesel. So obviously I was kind of subject to the same slings and arrows of the fuel marketplace, and had seen that kind of go up and down, and just did some kind of rough, back of the cocktail napkin calculations on cost of ownership and operating cost per mile, and just made sense in that situation. Obviously, in this case, comparing X to X, there's clearly a bit more capability in my 1-ton diesel truck than there is in my EV truck. But I also have we have several other diesel trucks here at the office. So if I really need to be pulling a heavy load, or I need to do a long trip with no stops, I've got that option. So for my day-to-day driver, it just needs to make sense. So
have you towed with your truck?
Only light, so landscape trailer with not much on it, but it's more than capable. Anything, I would say, as we well know, the torque on these things that these electric motors are capable of producing, it's clearly not a torque limitation standpoint as far as what it can tug. It's going to be mostly chassis, I would imagine brakes, other things like that once you go from an F-150 to an F-250, there's those other things that are built into that class graduation to make it capable of towing those heavier loads. But towing the trailer with just a little bit on it, it was seamless. Didn't feel like there was anything back there. And clearly, I think if you're a small to medium sized boat owner or a camper or any of those other things, you can readily tow with any of the EV trucks that are out there. I mean, it doesn't even know it's back there.
Yeah, my experience has been like with towing, you don't feel the tow package behind you. It's just one of those things that the biggest kicker. I mean, I haven't done it myself, but I've seen a Lightning in a review video tow 14,000 pounds, which is above its max rating, and they didn't even know it was back there. Like the torque and the power behind the truck is there. It's just a matter of, obviously if you're going to take 14,000 pounds from Texas to Montana, it's going to be a long trip, a long road trip. Because the range
could be a long trip.
Yeah, the range is the thing that you see the most affected. So
now, so everybody understands though, between your truck and Josh's truck, which one's faster?
I don't know. I mean, have you taken on a Ford Lightning on the line? I don't know if you have or not.
I think Josh. I think we know which truck is faster at this point, don't we, Josh?
Just for clarity. Eric is a buddy, and we were together at one point in time, trucks side by side, and his smaller truck
Yes.
did punch me off the line pretty
I don't
hard.
think there's a huge weight. So it is definitely footprint smaller, but I don't think there's a huge weight offset. What's the curb weight on the Lightning?
7,300, 7,800.
Yeah, it's up there.
No, it's not 78. Yeah, I think it's just over 7. So small weight
Small but
offset
mighty.
and small but mighty. And I would say the weight offset was even further mitigated in this case because we had as an aggregate of our 2 passengers versus your 2 passengers. I mean, Matt was in your front seat, and that's like, he's a tiny little thing. You know what I mean? So we had me and Jesse. We had me and Jesse in my truck, and we did also have some. We had some munitions in the front of my truck as well. So,
What's interesting
so I think the weight offset was pretty. Yeah.
It actually says that your Rivian weighs 7,148 curb weight, and it says mine weighs 6,500.
Wow.
Oh, there's no way. I can't imagine. I mean, what's the kilowatt hour on that battery pack on yours?
131, I think.
Yeah, I'm some 135, I think. So
That's probably
I
for
can't
the
imagine.
That might not be for the extended range.
Yeah, it's there's no way.
Yeah.
We'll provide that at a better time.
They were surprising. I told you I'd driven that Ford Lightning at the dealership. I drove not one as nice as yours, but like an XL. I mean, literally straight rubber floors. And I mean, that girl's quick too. I mean, you could hear it when you were getting into it. It was just, you could hear the traction control just modulating, the torque output because it was like, just chewing the tires.
How was that again?
As it was going through.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, going from a traditional ICE, I mean, I only had a EcoBoost, basic engine, but I mean, going from that to electric engine or not engine, electric motor setup. I mean, there's no comparison at all to power or torque. I mean, it takes. I mean, you see the best gas powered trucks out there, like the Raptor. Raptor
TRX,
and then the TRX. I mean, like, the Lightning can take down the TRX and almost takes down the Raptor R, which are significant engines and significant gas burn to get to that same level of output. So I mean, it's unrivaled for sure.
So with your overall experience, would you recommend the Rivian?
Yeah. I mean, clearly, I think the big challenge for the marketplace on these things is going to be the battery technology and, hopefully driving the price curve on these things to where the more normal ICE consumer can get into them. But, I mean, it definitely would. I think the Rivian, certainly for a first offering, as compared to the most, significantly well-known electric vehicle manufacturer out there in Tesla. I think for a first offering, in the case of the Rivian, they did a really nice job with it. Just like all new trucks, all new vehicles. I mean, the old rule of thumb is that you never wanted to buy a first year of anything, but I think that is to the power of exponent when we talk about buying the first model year from a brand new car manufacturer as well, auto manufacturer. But
it seems like it's relatively smooth with that being the first year model for a first year car manufacturer.
Absolutely. As compared to, like I said, some of the other ones that have come out, I think, body fitment seems to be good. QAQC seems to be pretty good. I think they're learning some stuff and redesigning some things. So, but yeah, it's been good and their service has been good. The biggest gripe, I mean, you always got to, we're going to sandwich, 2 compliments and maybe a criticism in the middle. The biggest issue I had was mostly like, and my guide, they call it guide, the guy or gal that navigates you through the purchasing process. He was very good, but there were just gaps in communication in the middle because I was seeing, at one point, I think from a reservation, like numerical assignment, I was like number 7,000 something, because you could see kind of when you would click on the link and you could see kind of where you were. So I was certainly in that initial chunk that came out. And then I was hearing stories about guys that were like reservation numbers of like 18,000, 14,000, like getting their trucks. And it's just like crickets on my end of things. So that was a little frustrating, but again, I wasn't waiting on it as a primary vehicle and not having another vehicle in its place. So that clearly mitigated any sort of difficulty, that I endured as part of it. But service and everything else, they've been pretty good, So yeah, I can't complain. I mean, it's a fun little truck and definitely makes the driving experience more fun. It's not in my Duramax diesel. I wouldn't have raced a Ferrari on an entrance ramp to a highway and beat the Ferrari in this case. Allegedly in Mexico, as they say in the street racing world. I don't know that we actually broke the speed limit either way, but it may be, display of speed as far as the acceleration curve maybe.
I will say it again. It's not about speeding. It's about getting to the speed limit quickly.
Correct. First one to 60. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. So that was fun. And I don't know if you've done it yet, Josh, but so we got a lot of rain down here, and just for blanks and giggles, it kind of turned the stability control off. Oof, boy, she's a handful in the wet. I will say that. Goodness me, man, you can tell how much kind of interventionism is in there with the computer kind of controlling for wheel spin and yaw control and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, when I drove it, it was predictable because obviously the weight on these trucks is so low, with the skateboard being so low and mass centralized. So it was very predictable as far as that, but if you wanted to Tokyo drift it, you absolutely could. So, yeah.
I had a parking lot in Mexico yesterday. I had a parking lot in Mexico yesterday, and I hit a turn a little faster than normal.
Yeah,
but I didn't turn traction control off.
yeah, she barks at you when you do it. But yeah, it's a much more visceral experience.
Yeah.
Than driving. Minus the replacement of the noise of combustion. It's a lot more fun, and I find that the experience of driving an EV is more calming on some level than driving a gas or fuel based.
Stepping up to that Ferrari and hearing that Ferrari whine, and then you just silently take off and yeah. I mean, there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the driving experience is just something completely different that obviously a non-EV owner, everybody that I've put in my truck has been like, this is different. I mean, it's a totally different experience when it comes to driving an EV. It's one of the things I love the most about it is, a lot of people want the loudest and most roaring vehicle, and that is fun. And there's a time and place for that. I think Jessie would lean towards the loud and roaring. However, there's something unique just about having that power, that torque, and it being completely silent. It's just it's a different, smooth, really nice, effective ride.
I mean, back to your point as far as would I encourage it? That I think really comes down to, in large part right now, I think as we've discussed, I think the limiting factor in this case and the deployability of EVs, beyond just like we talked about cost and battery technology and obviously some other kind of environmental factors that I think they're navigating through as it's a still newer technology. But in large part, it's going to be support for the EV in your marketplace and how are you going to be using the vehicle. If you're going to be mostly charging at home and it's going to be, kind of a predictable commuter route, as a primary vehicle, you're probably okay. If you're talking about doing longer trips and other things, as we've both done at this point, you more than me, and we've seen kind of some of the limitations in the charging marketplace right now, then it's a bit more of you got to throw in a bit more calculus.
It seems like America,
before you make the decision.
It seems like America needs to be powered up by a new setup of stations. But what do I?
Correct. So, possibly, and yes, and absolutely. We look at, as we're looking at in this case, the gaps in the infrastructure and in the grid. Where I live here, closer to DC, obviously a bit more saturated. Really big adoption rate of EVs up here, but we also have the grid the grid capacity to handle it. But even still, in this case, we see peak usage, and we see other things like that. We haven't had any brownouts or anything. It's not California, so we haven't had anything as far as on that end of things. But we are definitely seeing challenges on that. So I think charging solutions that are going to be maybe potentially grid independent, shall we say, are going to be important. Which, as we talked about, that's really, I think, the wave of the future in order to support these things.
Yeah, and I think in general, I mean,
just
the natural progression is, I mean, as the EV market expands, I mean, this is a gaping hole, which is the reason that the government's doing all these incentives to provide stations. I mean, there's a definite need for charging infrastructure because, like you're saying, around town and you're charging at the house, perfect experience. I don't have any complaints at all. But, taking a road trip like we discussed last week, taking a road trip to Florida and having to really sit down and map out where you're stopping, how you're stopping, is there somewhere to eat? I mean, it's a different experience because of the lack of infrastructure. So within 2 years' time, having that infrastructure every 50 miles nationwide will make a gigantic difference
Absolutely.
in, EV user confidence. But it's definitely something that, we need to see improvements in the vehicles for range and otherwise, just to provide more of a traditional experience, like a gas-powered vehicle would, with less inconveniences like, long distances between chargers and no amenities at the stations and otherwise.
Exactly. And obviously charging speed, and I know the batteries on that end of things, the tech is getting even better. I mean, I saw something the other day where they were talking about there was one new rapid charge. I'm going to murder who it was, so I'm just going to forget it. But something where they were looking at a 600-mile range, and they were talking about full charge, obviously not to 100%, but effectively full charge in something like 7 minutes with the new tech coming out. I mean, in that case, you are equaling the correct, the stopover time. Now, as we've talked about, as you've seen, the dependability, even in the placement of that charging network, the dependability there has been problematic, because I know I've been to more than a handful of stations, and you pull up the charger A, and you're literally, in my truck, which I know is capable upwards of like 200 kilowatt per hour, it's a charger capacity, but I'll pull up to 150 kW charger, and it's like pulling down like 40. I'm like, come on, man. And I'll call the not to be named charging company, and they'll tell me, well, every vehicle is different and it's coming from your vehicle. I said, okay, the charger next to me is open. I'm going to call you from that one and see if that story just holds water. And you literally pull the truck out, pull it over, put it in, and the next one right next to it is pulling down 125 kW. And I'm like, come on, man. So there's a lot of, even in the charging network as it exists, there's a lot of room for improvement there, so that you're not doing kind of musical chairs, at the charging station. So,
which is where I think that, I think in the charging space, like Rivian announced this week with the NACS adaptation, they're trying to open up the network to drivers to utilize systems like Tesla, because I think Tesla's, systems have become,
they're the standard, I think.
They're the standard, and they have a certain level of reliability and, consistency when it comes to that technical aspect of, delivering power. And so I think like Rivian and like Ford, like we're both going to have upcoming our adapters, and, the new vehicles having the different model types will kind of open up the network to where we're not, restricted. One charging infrastructure nationwide along the corridors. It kind of gives the opportunity to fill in with some different levels of reliability with stations. So,
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, I think, even beyond just pushing the development curve and the adoption curve of the EV. Obviously, Tesla was great as far as that goes. I mean, they kind of were it for the longest period of time. But absolutely, as far as on their support and the things, I know people that have Teslas, and they don't even think twice about driving up and down the Eastern Seaboard. I mean, it's completely, it's not even like an instant of a thought. I mean, they'll pull into a supercharging station and they'll go from 15% to 90% in like 15 minutes, which by the time that you've logged another, roughly speaking, 300 miles, most people want to get out, walk around, get the blood flowing again. So
and
that's
the difference between a CCS driver and a Tesla driver is Tesla can stop at Buc-ee's, and CCS is stopping in a big
Parking
box
lot.
change parking lot.
Right.
And that's
exactly.
there's a difference in experience there because, like we discussed last week, I mean, but Buc-ee's compared to a grocery store parking lot is a little bit different of experience for the driver.
And if you not where a Buc-ee's is, I'm sorry.
Yeah. If you don't have a Buc-ee's,
exactly.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Sheets and Wawa's up here for Tesla. So, so similar but different, obviously. So, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, any other tidbits on your truck that you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
No, I think if you're thinking about it, and drive it, find a buddy. There's definitely little message boards out there, and I know a lot of people are big proponents of tech. They're happy to give people test drives or look at it, especially for example, Ford. You're still obviously on the list, and most of the larger dealerships have a test vehicle that you can pilot there. So Rivian is obviously kind of like Tesla. They've got their own distribution network, which is not as readily available, say, as a Ford dealership. But yeah, give it a shot. Obviously, when you say give it a shot, we're talking about $70,000+ trucks. Like, hey, give it a shot. You know what I mean? Because money grows on trees. But certainly, I know several people that have not on the truck end of things, but have in the Korean manufacturer space have EVs and love them. I mean, we're looking at those in our office to replace some of the internal combustion vehicles. Just from, I look at it I look at it from the standpoint of a maintenance standpoint. I'm fastidious about transmission fluid servicing and differential and this and that and all this other stuff. You look at an EV and you're like, you plug it in.
Change the wiper fluid.
Correct. Yeah. No blinker fluid required. So wiper blade, cabin air filters, and wiper fluid. Cool. Yeah, I like that maintenance schedule.
Yeah, the maintenance aspect is huge. I mean, I'm almost 20,000+ miles deep, and I've spent $50 on maintenance of the vehicle up to date. Obviously,
and my diesel, as a comparison, again, different vehicles and different ultimate, kind of capabilities. But as it pertained to the capability that I use it in, which is hauling my butt to and from work and to and from clients' places. Dude, who would have thought that Ukraine was so responsible for producing so many things?
It's
apparently,
amazing,
there's air quotes around there, right? Everything. But diesel exhaust fluid, the stuff that you have to put into that goes into the part of the catalyst process with the diesel to clean up the nitrides, the oxides of nitrogen or whatever. That went from being in a 2.5 gallon jug, it went from being $12 to $35.
Yeah.
And I'm putting 5 gallons of that in every oil change. So every 5,000 miles. I mean, just in that, just even not including the fuel, but just in that case, in your illustration of 20,000 miles, I would have already put in, times 4, I would have already put in $250 worth of diesel exhaust fluid.
Just exhaust fluid. Yeah.
Not to mention
the oil, filters, and everything else.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fuel. So, it's crazy. The difference, the cost of ownership is pretty significant.
It does. Well, we do appreciate your time today. Thanks for hopping on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
We'll be connecting soon. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, this has been Turned Down for What. Next week, we'll be talking about the use of trucks and vehicles that have frunks. So we'll kind of get into some of the details of what that's like. And let's go a little bit into the details about the NACS connector, where it came from, the timeline, because there's some interesting facts in that. I think the information was provided a long time ago to, hey, can we go to the system? And it was never used until now. So we'll get both of those next week. And we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.